Hello, I'm Sharon Scott Wilson with Resort Trades Magazine. We are very happy to introduce highlights from a recent interview Bob Kobek did in a conversation on privacy with an attorney. So enjoy and thank you for joining us.
Well, my friend, Mr. Josh Stevens, we are, or Joshua, as your profile says there on the YouTube frame, we're recording, and I'm assuming that you're cool with that because
I'm good with that.
Because you're a lawyer, and one of the things that you specialize in is permission-based everything, permission-based marketing, permission-based privacy, permission-based, basically, as the slide says, TCPA. And all things TCPA. And that means everything from talking to regulators to helping with contracts. In fact, Josh is the attorney that helps us with our contracts. And to make sure that we're staying compliant in our survey business when we're rolling out surveys, because in the world of privacy, starting with GDPR and now moving over to the California new privacy law, everybody is somehow, some way liable in that cycle. So you got to really be aware of what safe harbor means for you and your business. I mean, it's pretty easy to trip, isn't it, Josh? I mean, we got more than one regulation these days.
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting is as this continues to develop, I think, for your business in the customer survey world and anybody who interacts with consumers through the telephone, whether that be calling or texting, we've had the TCPA and privacy laws specific to teleservices and telecommunications for a while. We've also had privacy regulations applicable to certain industries like GLBA in the financial world or HIPAA in the health world. But we're now starting to see this growing emergence of general privacy laws. And Bob, honestly, there are so many nuances to these and so many variations, and small changes in factual patterns can really have a huge impact. You really do have to stay on top of them.
So like in the greater scheme of things, wouldn't you say that it's anybody that is collecting or using any consumer data for any reason?
Yeah. So, in the privacy world, we think about businesses in two buckets: controllers and processors. So the controllers are the people who set the purposes and means of the processing. They're the businesses that actually collect your information for their own use, their own purposes. And then the processors are people who they contract with to maybe do some processing of that data. So to use your business as an example, Bob, right? Your clients would be the controllers, because they're the ones who are retaining you to do this work on their behalf. And then you would be a processor because you're processing information on their behalf, but they're the ones who are contracting you to do it.
I mean, in the world of, we'll talk about HIPAA, for instance, because that's a good general security, overview umbrella. In the world of HIPAA, data encryption, for instance, is really particularly important. And when you're encrypting data, it seems counterintuitive to collect data, encrypt data, and then report back on that data. So there's a decryption process I know it's that, by the way, that's as technical as I'm going to get. It's capable of getting, but but the fact is though, data and transfer data at rest, both of those data buckets are included in this, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. A consumer wants to know what you're doing with their data. You got to tell them.
Yeah. And, I always like to think of it as collection, use, and disclosure, right? So all the way from the point in which that data is first collected from the consumer, all the way to when it's through when it's transferred to a processor, to when that processor is transferring it back to the controller. Maybe it's going to some other third party for some reason. Maybe there's some data scrubbing happening, some cleaning up. We talk about in TCPA world, DNC, right? We companies often hire outside vendors to scrub calling lists against the DNC registries. So you may be sharing a file with that company to do that scrubbing. They're passing it back to you. That whole cycle, all the way until that data has been scrubbed and purged from every system, you've got obligations. And those obligations will change over time, but there's going to be something that is restricting the use of that information or putting parameters around how you have to protect that information at every link in that chain.
Well, then there's the disclosure part, right? I mean, not just the typical normal data breach disclosure. If you go back to GDPR, for instance, and how that evolved, and now into the California, soon to be Virginia, state of Washington. Right now, I think I'm aware of like 4 additional regulations that are about to come out. And so when you mentioned DNC a bit ago, it reminded me that at one time there were 51 different DNC rules that in the world of phone calls you had to follow, in 50 states plus 1 federal. And I fear the same thing can happen here.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, right? So anybody who's lived in TCPA or telemarketing is very familiar with this overlay of having federal regulation plus state level regulation, and having 51 different frameworks. Well, actually, I guess 52 if you include DC, that you have to deal with. What's quickly emerging in just general consumer privacy, I fear, is a similar situation. To go back, you mentioned GDPR. What Europe tried to do with GDPR was set one framework that applied across the whole 27-member block. And the goal of that is to give businesses and consumers certainty on what their rights are, the disclosures that need to be given, how data can be processed, what protections need to be in place, so everybody knows what needs to happen. Here in the States, what we're starting to see is we've got California, Virginia, which have both passed, as you mentioned. Washington and Oklahoma have bills that have passed at least one chamber of the state legislature and look very likely to pass a second one. Each bill is somewhat different. It has its own nuances. There are exceptions that apply in one context that don't apply in another. And at the federal level, with the prior Congress, we saw several privacy bills proposed. They didn't really go anywhere. There was always a tension, particularly around this preemption issue. And we saw it most acutely in the Senate, where the Senate Commerce Committee, the Republican chair at the time, was very much in favor of preemption. The Democratic ranking member did not want preemption, wanted the states to be able to experiment and do their own thing over and above essentially a federal floor. With Democrats in control of the Senate now, we may see a revival of privacy law. I question whether it's going to have preemption in it or not. And that's one of my concerns. It's great for us lawyers, right? Having to deal with 50-something frameworks, but for businesses and frankly for consumers who want to understand their rights, without preemption, there's a lot of ambiguity.
Well, the majority of attorneys general in the United States are Republicans, and attorneys general certainly are not going to be in favor of preemption. And while the attorneys general, in most states, you can walk down the street and ask somebody, who is your attorney general? And it'd be very, very few people could tell you who it is. People just don't know that. However, members of the United States Senate and members of the House of Representatives do know who that attorney general is, because for this very reason and this very discussion, states' rights, preemption. We're the argument that, hey, we're a republic, and so we should be able to regulate ourselves. We're going through it right now with the Senate 1 and HB 1 and in the House and the voting rights. So it's all about states' rights. And so something like preemption is almost a dirty word to an AG, as I understand it. So let me ask you, Josh. Well, first of all, I do know that every time a regulation passes through the House, the Senate, FTC, whatever state, a new business pops up. I mean, this is creating a new industry for lawyers, to your point. You think about TCPA and some of our friends like Possible Now and DNC.com, and those guys, basically very successful businesses, were actually created because of those. We're going to see that same thing happen here with privacy because it's not going away. Correct?
That's correct. And frankly, we're already seeing it. There are some businesses, and I won't give them free advertising here, but there are some businesses that kind of got their start with GDPR and helping businesses navigate all the consumer rights and disclosure obligations under GDPR that are now reworking their systems to be able to handle the US laws that are coming up. And so not just in the legal space where obviously we give advice and help businesses understand how to comply, but on the actual technical, how do you implement some of these things? Let me give you an example. Under the CCPA, similar to the GDPR, CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Sorry, I often talk in acronyms.
We do that.
But the consumer has the right to request up to twice a year for no fee, essentially inventory, a production of the personal information that a controller has on file about them. And so think about that if you're a business that does a decent bit of marketing. Let's say you're a hotel chain and you collect troves of data, right, about people who visit your website, who talk to your customer service agents, who actually make a booking, who stay with you, who purchase goods from your shop in your resort, or purchase food at the resort restaurant. And you're pulling all that data together to create a great profile about this consumer so you know how to market to them. It's a lot of data, right, about this consumer. Now, say a consumer comes to you and files a right to know request. They want an inventory of that data. How do you operationally produce that to them? How do you pull that data out of your systems, out of the systems of your data processors, compile it all together, and actually give it to the consumer? There's a huge technical piece that is where we're seeing a lot of businesses popping up who can help businesses with that technical side of actually implementing those requirements.
You just gave an entrepreneur a pretty good idea.
I should get a commission for that.
Well, nothing happens till the sale gets made. So
yeah, that's true.
I mean, in technology, back to the technology, and in our case, and in everybody's case, we're effectively in the data collection business. And so in our case, in our particular case, removing data is counterintuitive to what we do also. And when you think about a grocery store where you go in and you scan your favorite number and you get the discount, they're collecting your name, they're collecting your information, they know who you are. And so they will send you an email or they'll send you a direct mail with discounts on stuff that you buy. It's coming directly to you. If you remove that data, then you're not getting those benefits anymore, correct? You're not removing the data, you're removing your name from the data.
Well, it depends. There are different ways to handle it. And in full disclosure, I'm in Cincinnati, home of Kroger, right? And Kroger is the one who pioneered the model of the customer number that everything gets linked to, and you get all these custom coupons. If a consumer asks to have that information deleted, then under CCPA or the New Virginia law, you really do have to take a close look at the exemptions that are available under each of those frameworks as to whether you have to actually delete that information or not. Under most of them, you can aggregate or de-identify data so that it can no longer be tied back to a person. But the problem is going to be there's this reasonableness standard. And so even if, say, you take my Kroger information, you strip away my name, my address, my phone number, all of that from the Kroger ID, but you still have this profile around that Kroger ID. Maybe you could, by looking at that data, figure out who I am. And this is an issue that we see particularly around geolocation data, where people will say, well, we can't identify who that is. We don't have it tied back to them. We don't have their name associated with it. But if you can look at that data and see that that device shows up at this address every night, and then maybe goes to this church down the street every Sunday, and maybe goes to this workplace Monday through Friday at 9 a.m., you can pretty quickly, just by doing a little bit of data pen, a little bit of research, you can figure out who that person is.
Well, that's what they call big data.
Right. And so that's where we go to that reasonableness standard.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I request, if I'm a Kroger shopper and I request my name be removed, but then a week later I go back in and I scan my card again. I mean, as consumers, we demand our privacy, and we should, by the way. Let me also point out something that in our particular case, even though it's not an easy thing for us to reprogram to be able to remove data. It was very expensive when GDPR came out. And with GDPR on our end, what we do is that probably satisfied 90% of any regulation that's going to come out if we inform our client that you guys, you are now the ones that are really truly complicit. We've got our part taken care of. You tell us what to remove, we remove it. But boy, there are just going to be so many instances where the consumer deserves privacy. I support the privacy. I got, other than the fact that it is going to be hard on us as a business to conform to everything, I don't see any reason not to do it.
The way I look at it is consumers are demanding privacy, and consumers deserve it, like you said. Businesses need to get with the time. I mean, it's not just whether the government's forcing you to do it, but there's also market pressures where consumers are now starting to think about what are businesses doing with my data and how are they securing my data, right? We've seen huge data breaches over the last, 5, 6, 7 years. Recently, there was the significant exposure with Microsoft Exchange that potentially exposed data of thousands of businesses, right? Consumers are becoming more aware of this. And over time, I think what we're going to see is they're going to start favoring businesses that protect their privacy a little bit more than businesses that don't. I could be wrong on that.
No, it
gosh
goes.
knows, everybody with Facebook still turns over mountains of data, but to have access to it. But I do think we're going to see a trend of consumers focusing more on privacy.
Well, just as for instance, a net promoter score is a predictor of revenue through loyalty, privacy is going to be a predictor of trust. Mm-hmm. And it's where establishing the relationship and engaging your customer at one time was like the thing. But the problem with the thing as it was it didn't really give you any way to know how. And so today what we know is that convenience is a factor. Most people already know what they're going to buy before they buy it. I mean, we just bought a new coffee table, for crying out loud. It took us 4 hours, but we did it from our couch. And so if I would have needed to go to the store to buy it, I could have. And so the whole trust issue comes into play because I want to know that my privacy is protected, and is it convenient? Is it easy? So, if you're adhering to the privacy stuff, you're going to gain the trust and the convenience.
Yeah. And I will also say this, if you're a data processor, so if you're on that side of the line primarily, as opposed to a data controller, you can also use privacy as a tool to attract data controller clients, right? Who want to work with data processors who have the procedures in place, who have the protocols in place. to maintain that compliance and that data security. And that can be a competitive advantage in that B2B context as well.
Well, believe me, I mean, that's one of the reasons we stay ahead of it. As you know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we retained a lawyer to make sure that we had the right language in our contract, which, by the way, was Mac Murray Shuster LLP, jstevens. But I prefer to stay ahead of it. You know, we could probably get a knock on the door 6 months, have done nothing, and the knock on the door would say, okay, you violated the privacy policy, and I can say, I made a mistake, and I might be able to get by that first one. However, back to your point, if I can say to my clients today and my prospects today, by the way, we have those protocols in place, and they're right here, paragraph 9, check it out. You know, we are a little bit ahead of our competition.
Yeah.
So, you know, it adds some talking value.
Yeah, it adds value. It adds comfort, right? And in the business world, obviously, comfort is key when it comes to these issues. And I will tell you from having, our firm does compliance work. I strictly do compliance, but we, and some transactional work. I do some on the transactional side as well. And in due diligence projects that we do on behalf of acquiring companies in an M&A context, privacy is always one of the key issues that we dig into. And before companies can get investment, before, you know, if they want to be acquired, we're usually talking, you know, smaller kind of startup early stage companies. They got to show that their privacy house is in order, or the investors don't want to touch it.
Well, all our compliance stuff. I mean, everything, including
right, yeah.
so that we don't burn our whole day talking about this wonderful new world of privacy and what's going to happen. This has been like very cool. I thought about, you know, maybe I could just ask you a whole bunch of questions, pick your brain, and not have to pay your fees. But I figured that wouldn't be fair. You and I still have some unfinished business, so we'll get back to it. And I really do appreciate this. This will go out on LinkedIn and a few other groups. And of course, I'll share it with you, so you can share it with wherever you want to. Josh, I can't thank you enough. I really, really, really do appreciate it.